What is the most important thing people need to know about U.S. military intervention in Afghanistan?
Yeah, so I guess the first thing I just want to take a second to say is that the first, 50 pages of this book are Scott explaining like the lead up to Afghanistan. And these are all things that happened from before when I was born. And so it's different to learn about because it's just like a history book to me, you know what I mean? But it's absolutely fantastic. And there's so much important stuff in there that really will so if anything doesn't sound super familiar or something, like go back and read that because Scott has so many important details of what happened in there. But just starting off with Afghanistan, which of course is, the first in the global war on terror and everything like that. I think the most important thing that Scott writes about, and of course he has the whole book Fool's Errand that's behind me and everything, but allowing Osama bin Laden, or maybe we have to qualify that a little bit, but Osama bin Laden was able to escape Afghanistan to Pakistan when the Americans knew where he was. And there were calls, and Scott highlights this and explains all the calls and efforts made by different U.S. military commanders and things like that to actually take out the core group of Al-Qaeda that was attempting to escape from Afghanistan to Pakistan. And they were able to do so because the Americans were far more concerned about fighting the Taliban than they were about actually, killing Osama bin Laden. And so it's such a perfect example of essentially what happens throughout the entire war on terror. They constantly don't get distracted with the big prize. The Taliban are no threat to the United States. Iran is no threat to the United States. And yet, we highlight and focus our war efforts on these people. Saddam Hussein, another example of that. And, at the expense of allowing the actual few people in the world who really want to do damage to America, like the Osama bin Ladens out there, to escape and run rampant. And so, to me, that's the biggest thing. Because when I was growing up as a kid, Keith, I remember all this B-roll footage we would see on TV every night on the news of these rockets slamming into these mountainsides in Afghanistan, and them explaining how we're doing everything we can to bring the man who perpetrated 9/11 to justice. And it just wasn't true. The entire war on terror narrative wasn't true. Everything they told us wasn't true. They could have gotten Osama bin Laden had they dedicated all their resources to getting Osama bin Laden. And then the other part of that, of course, is the Taliban were willing to hand over Osama bin Laden to any third country. They didn't even have to fight a war in Afghanistan to hold the man who, was most responsible for 9/11 accountable, right? Like, we could have just had the Taliban turn over Osama bin Laden to any third country. So you're going to give him to the UAE or Qatar, where there's major U.S. military bases, and they're going to not give him to the United States? Come on. Or they say third country, that could even be a NATO member state. Give them to the UK. Allow then for the US to present their extradition evidence in court, just like they're doing now with Julian Assange. And of course, that's a whole fictitious case, but we could extradite people and do from the UK to the US all the time. There are legal ways to handle this kind of stuff. I actually had a conversation with Eric Brakey, who's really great and everything, from Yale recently. And it's even forgotten on libertarians. They go, how do we deal with terrorism? If you commit a crime, if you kill Americans, there's an American justice system to handle that. And it all could have been handled that way, but George Bush wanted wars, and he created wars for it.
And briefly explain the motives of Osama bin Laden and Ayman al-Zawahiri's group, Al-Qaeda. What was their motive for attacking Americans from 93 to 2001? Yeah, so
there's a lot of attacks in here, and in part of this time, Osama bin Laden's in Sudan. He's not even in, Afghanistan or anything like that. They carry out attacks on the USS Cole in Yemen, and bombings of different embassies in Kenya and Saudi Arabia and elsewhere. But the motivation here, what Osama bin Laden, whether or not this guy believes what he's right, he's a leader. So if he is just like some more politician who just sees this as an opportunity to recruit people to his followers, or he actually believes there are two different things, right? But it doesn't really matter. The point is this is the message that Osama bin Laden conveyed to get people to kill themselves in order to do damage to the American empire or actually kill Americans, right? And that was that the U.S., after the Iraq War, they stayed in the Holy Land, in the land of the whole two holy places, Mecca and Medina, Saudi Arabia, and continued to bomb Afghanistan, or Iraq, excuse me, from there. But not only after, through the 1990s and the Clinton presidency, not only were we bombing Iraq and destroying the country's infrastructure, we also had a starvation sanctions campaign against that country. And so while the 500,000 number that's so frequently cited is inflated, there were hundreds of thousands, like 200,000 to 300,000 Iraqi children who end up dead in the 1990s because of what America did to that country. And then they were, bombing from Saudi Arabia, which is just, adding insult to injury when that happens. And so these kind of things start to radicalize people and start to, want them to wage a war against America. Also, the occupation and the U.S. support for Israel of the Palestinian people is a major factor here. I think there's one more grievance he has that I'm missing. The bombing of Sudan. They bombed that I think it was some kind of medicine facility in Sudan, and that ends up depriving people of medicine and killing a whole bunch of people. But just how general U.S. imperialism worked around the world, where the Muslims got screwed. If you go back, there's some great people who point out that, like, if you go back to the after World War I, World War II, America was actually like seen as the by people in the Middle East as like defeating the occupiers, or like surviving, like, what happened to Europe and everything like that. We have freed ourselves from European colonialism, right? And so actually, it's not like Muslims just hate Americans or America or anything like that. It's been, the sustained campaigns in the Middle East, I guess, stretching back from, the overthrow of the Iranian government, installing the Shah, and then everything that happened to Iran after too. But just, U.S. meddling in the Middle East has allowed Osama bin Laden to drive so many people to his cause. And, it made sense, as we've seen since, right? It's not like we've been involved in the Middle East, Keith, for the past, 30 years or so, and the number of terrorist groups has dwindled. It's absolutely exploded. And so what does that tell you? American intervention causes terrorism. And so, during as Scott explains in the first chapter of his book, it's like 50 pages, but he's explained all the little things that America is doing to kill Muslims, throughout the Middle East, and how this eventually, allows Osama bin Laden to gather enough of a following to, pull off a very lucky shot and carry